Hello, Ann and Vincent. Earlier I'd come up with the idea of sharing some articles on teacher reflection, and one that just popped into my mind when I was writing that was an article by Smythe, which I'm going to share with you now. And it popped into my mind because as I was reading the literature on reflection, it was an article that didn't just tell me something that I already knew or tell me about an aspect of reflection that I was already aware of, but it's an article that opened my eyes to something very fundamental to know about reflection, and that is, it is a political act. Now, when I remembered reading this article, I remembered that it was a pretty straightforward argument, but I must have been about a month into my reading and had a lot of background knowledge, because now as I reread the article, I find it quite difficult. And I see all kinds of references, which I am aware of, but if you haven't read the related readings that Smythe is referring to, it doesn't always make a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do is highlight a few points in this article and invite you to read, especially the second half of the article on, but the whole thing if you want to, or even just as much as you find that's actually of interest to you. All right? So the first point that I want to highlight here from Smythe is this little bit of text here. It says, at the outset I want to make the point, and it goes on to say the logic of capitalism, etc. Now, as I'm reading Smythe, I'm reading that he's a Marxist. And I like political arguments from the left and the right, but I'm identifying him as a Marxist, and so that may be a turnoff. Now, just so you know, I happen to know somebody at Penn State who is friends with Smythe, and he said to me, are you crazy? Smythe's not a Marxist. What are you talking about? But I think the guy from Penn State's a Marxist, so put that aside. But regardless, I love the arguments that Smythe is making. Whether or not I happen to be on the same side of the political spectrum as Smythe, I think he has a lot to say. All right, here's the next reference that I want to highlight. And here he's talking about Madeline Hunter. And I bring it up because Madeline Hunter was pretty popular in teacher education 10, 15, 20 years ago. So maybe, Ann and Vincent, based on how long you've been teaching, maybe you were introduced to Madeline Hunter. Now, one of the things that Madeline Hunter, a couple of things that Madeline Hunter is known for. One is behavioral objectives. She's known for a certain lesson plan outline where you have an anticipatory set and then something at the end. But she's also known for this idea of teacher as decision maker. So it fits right in line with the whole idea of teacher reflection. Teachers making decisions, teachers being thoughtful. But what Smythe is arguing here is that even though Madeline Hunter gives the appearance of teacher as decision maker, her model is so prescriptive that all she's really asking you to do is make very modest kind of decisions where all the big decisions have been made for you. It's a prescriptive format, and then you're allowed to think within a constrained area. This is probably the most important point that I want to make. He refers to a categorization of teacher reflection from Zeichner. And this is one of the better categorizations in my opinion. You can argue with it, but here they are. 4 different ways of encouraging teachers to reflect. And I want you to think about these 4 ways in terms of your own values and in terms of what you might be asking an intern or a mentee to be reflecting on. All right, the first reflective movement was an academic version where you were asking intellectual questions about your content area. So history teachers, instead of saying, well, how do I teach history better, they'd be asking questions about the Civil War, and they'd be doing inquiry in the Civil War. This actually was the form of reflection that was popular like around 1960. A lot of articles being written about this back then. Not very popular today as pedagogy has taken the forefront. Number 2, and this is probably the most important one, the social efficiency model, sometimes called technical rational model. Now what this means is that the ends, the objectives of teaching are well defined. Even the methods of teaching are well defined. The goal is efficiency. The goal is maximum learning. And the questions the teacher asks is about how do I maximize learning. So going back to that Madeline Hunter argument, where supposedly she was providing teachers with freedom. The social efficiency model says, yes, you have freedom to think about how you can get even more efficient. And I think you could probably relate to this both in the standardization of the curriculum, where we're saying how can we make lessons more and more fit the actual goals of the curriculum on the one hand, and then on the other hand, in terms of methods, those are becoming well defined too. So we ask questions from Danielson maybe like, how can we do teaching more and more to fit what is described as best practice? So we're asking questions, we're doing teacher reflection, but within this very constrained form where the goal is efficiency. And the last one is the more progressive version. All right. Now, here's the final point, and the point that I said was the central theme of this. That reflective practice is not politically neutral. The way you ask questions, the kind of questions you ask about, have a political, have a philosophical orientation. So that's pretty obvious, I think, when you look at the 4 videos. The lecturing might come from a very different place from a hands-on learning teacher. I think we know about that through just instinct maybe, or from discussions in teacher ed classes. But the same is also true about teacher reflection. Teacher reflection is just as philosophically laden as the choices you make about teaching are. It's not neutral. It's not just asking questions. There's theory, there's values behind the questions you're asking. And so the idea is to be thoughtful about why are you asking questions of a teacher that you're mentoring. Is it possibly good, the direction that we're going with schooling? Is it possibly good to have a standardized curriculum, standardized way of teaching? And then we ask questions to help teachers become more efficient at that, better at that. Or is there some kind of different kind of change that we want? All right, so if we're in this utilitarian, technical, rational, very pragmatic form of teacher reflection right now because of Danielson and Common Core, what's the alternative? What else is there? I mean, we're so deep in this that maybe we can't see anything else. So here's what my suggest would be a good set of 4 questions to ask to help teachers be more reflective. First, just describe. A lot of reflection approaches come up. Start with description. What do I do? Number 2, inform. What does this mean? So you see he's getting a little bit deeper there with the meaning. Number 3, here's where it becomes a little bit more radical. How did I come to be like this? So this question really departs from other forms of teacher reflection because you're saying, maybe I shouldn't just accept what I'm doing. Maybe I have to wonder, how did this start? Am I kind of trapped in some assumptions that I'm not really thinking about? And then finally, 4, reconstruct how might I do things differently. So 4 pretty straightforward, short, concise questions, but with a completely different kind of perspective behind them. Let's look at this in comparison to questions that PDE has put up that teachers can use to have a conversation about teaching. These would probably be considered by most people to be standard kind of reflective questions. So, for example, how is time allocated to work cooperatively with other teachers to be sure that your instruction is aligned with students' previous knowledge so that they can make connections for deeper understanding? Probably some good things there, right? But a lot of assumptions being made. How do you use multiple forms of assessment, including diagnostic, formative, and summative, to plan instruction and inform your work? There's quite a model underlying that of data being used to analyze teaching that's inherent in that question. rituals and routines have you encouraged in your classroom to set a tone of respectful behavior? Now, I'm not arguing with these questions. I advocate routines in the classroom, but I think you can see how this does fit well within the social efficiency framework, the idea of trying to maximize the quality of teaching within some very constrained assumptions.